Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Absolutely amazing.
Wonderful.
So yeah, let me start off. That you can't read that. I'm not sure what's happened to my presentation there, but basically it says blockchain in Africa. Can we walk the talk? So, I mean, I believe we can walk the talk, but I think we have to kind of do some very interesting stuff. I want to start off with maybe giving everyone kind of a picture that I drew to kind of help me understand how we can tackle the whole 4IR emergence. What I'd love to see is kind of an Africa 4.0 or 4.0. But I think many people think that this is all about the technology. But actually, it's the interaction between the technology, between new business models that become possible, between society and different skills that will eventually be needed, for example. And most importantly, it's also issues around governance. How do you actually create policy in this kind of ever-changing world? So yeah, I thought I'd just start off with that, just so that people can see my perspective on things. So will Africa 4.0 be driven by its entrepreneurs? I'll be talking a bit about that. I will talk about some national initiatives that are happening from various countries in Africa, and then some thoughts on how Africa moves from these small proof of concepts to actual real implementation out there. Yeah, okay, don't see that slide either. Okay, there we go. So the spirit of entrepreneurship is alive and well and living in Africa. We have very dynamic and adventurous young people, open to taking risks. I think as everywhere else in the world, the young people are our future. They know how to move forward and how to think outside of the box. They come from a totally different environment that I do, for example. So Africa is a home to a number of emerging blockchain and crypto communities. Blockchain hubs are emerging in Kenya, in South Africa, Nigeria, and many other countries, and they're growing steadily. It's a very exciting environment at the moment. I think what makes them perhaps slightly different, and we saw the previous presentation, which basically spoke about a blockchain for social good. What we're seeing is the local blockchain players and developers are using the technology to tackle social, economic, and political problems. So they're kind of using the environment they're in as an incentive and as an opportunity to change the status quo. And that's what makes it so very exciting. And you'll see a bit more about the kinds of things that are being done. So I'm going to talk about two projects. They are live in Nigeria and in South Africa, Yoma and Zolto. So Yoma is short for the Youth Agency Marketplace, and what makes it exciting is that it's using verifiable digital credentials to help African youth build up their digital CVs, and to also do a kind of an employment matching activity where they enable them to use these digital CVs to find employment that matches their skills. Zloto is, and they've linked up with Zloto, so these two startups are kind of working together. Zloto is a platform that is using blockchain technology to increase engagement amongst youth and to track positive behavior. So they have a whole lot of reward systems, and these rewards, they come in the form of vouchers, and they can be redeemed across 3,000 stores in South Africa. Another project that I was quite excited about is that of Covid-19 ID. I was involved in the project in the early stages. It kind of emerged out of the whole COVID-19 issue within the world, and the realization that so many of these solutions don't take all the context into consideration when they get developed. So many of the solutions are high tech. In Africa, for example, smartphone penetration is low. I think we're running at about 55% of penetration in the whole of Africa. So that provides kind of innovation opportunities to figure out, how can we actually enable everyone to access these kinds of innovations. So COVID ID kind of emerged out of that whole environment. There were about 150 volunteers, the same as Consensus was speaking about. So there were volunteers, there were developers, there were some of our bankers in the country, entrepreneurs, students, and they focused on a privacy-first methodology. So the idea was that users could prove their COVID-19 status reliably and securely with complete protection of privacy. And the way in which they did that was to use a QR code. So you would be able to go to a website or even do it on your phone if you do have a smartphone, register for the COVID ID, and you enter your status. You assigned a QR code. And then what you could do is you could actually print that QR code. So if someone doesn't have a smartphone, they could, for example, print it at their work or go to an environment where you could actually print these codes. So then whenever they enter a public place, so if they go onto a bus or a taxi or they visit a supermarket, the code gets scanned in by let's say, a security guard, and it generates a geolocation receipt and the date and time, and it's saved either on their device or by a company that actually offers custodial services. So the idea is that if you are confirmed positive after you visited a place, you would actually inform authorities using the app, and everyone who was in the same place at the same time would then be alerted. So, and it also keeps kind of a record of where you were over the past few days, let's say the past 10 days, and those people that were at the same places then would also be alerted. This is kind of to help people because, if you test positive and you have to remember where you were 10 days ago, I mean, that's not always possible. So, we were very excited about that. We did our best to get government excited about it and get involved. But ultimately, government went with the Google and Apple Bluetooth solutions, even though actually, knowing that many people didn't have access to smartphones, never mind smartphones with Bluetooth as well. And also the issue about, what's the possibility of two people running the same app, being close enough to each other to send a Bluetooth signal. But it ended with something very good because it's now been integrated into the MIT open source path check solution. So it makes provision for countries around the world where there isn't a high cell phone penetration. Another very exciting project is the project called Registry. And basically the aim of that is to connect students, universities, and employers via privacy reserving technologies. So the problem they solved is that student data is highly sensitive and universities spend large sums on maintaining the integrity of their student database. Employers, when they need to check and when they're trying to find potential candidates for employment, currently, before they did the solution, they would have to phone the university to check on the qualifications. And in fact, the university that this came out of actually eventually had a whole call center, and all they did was actually answer phone calls. So this is got huge potential, and it's currently running at about 5 universities in South Africa. The next project is also something that's very close to my heart. It's extremely African, if I can put it that way. It's something that talks to the African experience, and it's a small startup called Coronet, and what they do is they've developed an ethical human hair supply chain platform, and you might not realize this, but the human hair market in Africa alone is around $1 billion. And I mean, some of the stats, so out of the total 100 million units, 38 million human hair pieces are sold to 24 million African consumers annually. And there's lots of issues around counterfeit hair. So the whole market, the whole human hair market is kind of an informal market in Africa. So that causes a lot of problems because they can't, for example, insure their salons. They can't get funding and invest. They can't get loans from banks, etc. So the Coronet blockchain platform was developed in partnership with IBM. To create an end-to-end transparent supply chain with ethical human hair products. So the ultimate aim is to use this technology to accelerate the African salon sector into a bankable formal economy. They're about to pilot in South Africa, and they're very keen to pilot in Kenya as well. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that particular solution. And then something maybe not quite from a startup or an entrepreneur. There's some kind of really good entrepreneurial work happening in the financial sector in South Africa as well. And, believe it or not, they've actually managed to get the banks to actually talk to each other and kind of work together in a kind of pre-competitive fashion. So 5 of the banks basically got together with some insurance companies. They're part of what's known as the South African Financial Blockchain Consortium, and they're working on a self-sovereign identity solution. The first solution that they've developed was aimed at reducing the costs of a repeating KYC process. So people get identity wallets, they get kind of digital identities that they can actually use at any of the participating banks. The solution used Hyperledger, Indian Aries, and the Sovereign Network. Okay, my introductory slides don't seem to show up, but that's fine. I'll go on to the next one. So there have been some national initiatives happening around Africa as well. We're getting a lot of requests. For example, recently we actually did a strategy for the African Union on the 4IR, and blockchain was one of the technologies that they wanted to focus on. However, many of them are still bottom up, the initiatives. But, I think that we will eventually get there. Just to kind of talk about some of the stuff that's happening at a national level. The previous speaker spoke about CBDCs. Well, I think a lot of countries, Rwanda, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, and Mauritius, are busy looking at CBDCs. Many of them have set up regulatory sandboxes. If you look at South Africa, which is kind of my experience because that's where I'm from, they've developed something very interesting. They developed a position paper on crypto asset regulation, and what's quite exciting about that was the way in which they went about it. So instead of sitting behind closed doors and kind of coming up with something that didn't make sense, they went through a massive campaign to get the private sector, to get the Fintech sector involved, and they actually created an environment, which I will talk about a bit later on. And then just last week, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority published a draft declaration of crypto assets as a financial product under the Financial Advisory and Intermediary Services Act. So that is quite a major step forward for the country, in my opinion, because it actually looks at, at least it makes an attempt to kind of define what a crypto asset is. And then the South African Blockchain Alliance has been started, so that's a multi-stakeholder approach. And then, of course, we have the WEF C4R, the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, sits in South Africa, and there's another one in Rwanda as well. So, yeah, that's exciting work coming from that environment. There's still gaps. There's a lot happening around digital ID amongst the banks, but, they're finding it quite hard to engage government, which is a great pity. But I think that, Sanba is kind of working quite hard to persuade government to kind of look at digital ID, and there's talk of a digital ID innovation center being established that will kind of bring all the parties together. The next thing that I think is a huge opportunity in Africa is the whole issue around digital trade and trade finance via the blockchain. A lot of the very initial pilots that IBM did was actually done, I think, from Kenya, between Kenya and the Netherlands, actually. They looked at kind of moving, I think it was flowers, fresh flowers from Kenya to the Netherlands, and that went very well. And also the other thing that we should also note is that we've just had the African Continental Free Trade Agreement agreed to, so there's going to be a lot of action in this environment as well. Okay, and then I said I would talk more about how the South African Reserve Bank went about getting interest and getting buy-in and getting input from the various role players in South Africa. So they created the Intergovernmental Fintech Working Group, the IFWG, and what they've done as well, very, very impressively, is to actually establish a fintech incubator. And what I also need to say, it's not only is, the IFWG consists of government players as well. So all the financial sector regulators have got together, the Financial Intelligence Center, the National Credit Regulator, the South African Reserve Bank, and the South African Revenue Services. So, they've managed to get together with a common goal. Very exciting things happening with the innovation hub that they've established. So it offers a regulatory guidance unit to help innovators resolve specific questions. There's a regulatory sandbox that's been set up, which allows market innovators to actually test their products. And then there's an innovation accelerator that they've established as well to kind of try and get people to work a lot more across the various boundaries. And And then the Project Corker was something that was also done by our Reserve Bank, and basically it was looking at interbank transactions. They've won various awards for what they did. They kind of added to the blockchain body of knowledge by creating new algorithms, for example. So they basically showed that it's technically feasible to process wholesale payments between participants with full visibility to the central bank from an operational perspective. I think what I found interesting as well is kind of the central bank, or the Reserve Bank as it's called here in South Africa, was kind of able to sit back and kind of potentially take themselves totally out of the process, because the last pilot that they did, the central bank didn't need to approve any of the transactions. It was all done through smart contracts and some smart technical development. So I'm going to talk a bit about Sanba, the South African National Blockchain Alliance, which I'm currently heading up. So I think what's important about Sanba is that it's kind of government-driven. So it wasn't just a group of people kind of coming together and declaring themselves the South African National Blockchain Alliance. It actually is a true alliance between the various players in the ecosystem in South Africa. We've come up with kind of mapping the ecosystem, as you'll see over here. So kind of understanding what players the ecosystem consists of and what actions need to be taken. So the idea is to kind of Sanba is there to kind of connect all of these players in transparent ways, kind of similar to a blockchain itself, I guess. So we have four main objectives. So connecting academia, civil society, business, and government into a pre-competitive collaboration space to support research, development, and innovation in blockchain, facilitating skills development, advocacy, and education on all things blockchain, because that's still very, very, very much needed out there. People do not understand the value and the opportunities that blockchain could bring. Then looking at catalyzing blockchain adoption in all sectors of South Africa, and then looking at leveraging the blockchain ecosystem as a lobbying platform to tackle issues blocking blockchain adoption in the country. So we were only launched on the 3rd of April, so this year, when lockdown, I think we were about 3 or 4 days into lockdown. So that was an interesting experience, because we actually had to go digital within a couple of days, which we actually managed to pull off. So some of the challenges, and I think this is probably the same kind of in most countries in the world. So we're not that different. The lack of knowledge regarding blockchain's potential, this confusion about is blockchain Bitcoin and what is a cryptocurrency, and aren't cryptocurrencies all, scams? The whole crypto bubble of 2017 kind of did a lot of harm to, made a lot of people rich, but it also maybe did a lot of harm to the reputation of blockchain because of this confusion between blockchain, crypto, and Bitcoin. And I've also found that, we're still at that stage of, when you do a presentation to various government players or to the private sector, we're still going through that, what is blockchain? And, I think that they're far too complex for people to understand. People don't need to understand exactly how blockchain works. Most people don't know how the internet works. They just need to know what the benefit of blockchain is to them in their particular business case. Issues around infrastructure, obviously in Africa, I mean, that is a major problem. So, I mean, you kind of need always on connectivity, although I have seen some examples of, applications that kind of don't need always on connectivity. So digital infrastructure is still a major challenge. Regulation, kind of an obvious one, although I think South Africa is making great strides and maybe setting an example for other African countries to follow if they like. This whole mindset of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, I think that there's huge potential, but people are used to doing things in a certain way, and to change people's attitudes is one of the most difficult things you can do. So that's a major problem, and also the issue as well that blockchain is more than a network; it's an ecosystem. You can't do blockchain on your own. If you look at supply chain, for example, there's a whole ecosystem, around the whole supply chain environment. You can't have some people in and some people out. So it's kind of this all or nothing approach, I think, that kind of scares people a lot of the time, because that costs money to kind of reinvent the way things have been done with new technologies as well. And then I think we need stronger leadership at a continental level. So I think that the European Union has done some interesting things, and we have the kind of equivalent, the African Union. So I think that we can learn a lot from the European Union, and not only what works, but maybe what doesn't work. And we need to kind of contextualize to our particular environment as well. So to take blockchain forward in Africa, I spoke about looking at it from the African Union angle. And I think that, there's multiple, and I'm sure it's the same in the EU. There are so many different frameworks and initiatives and strategies, some looking at digital transformation, some of them calling it 4IR, Agenda 2063, Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy. I mean, we need to consolidate these. I think Africa is quite good at writing really, cool documentation about what should be done, but we're not that good at actual implementation. So, that's a major problem. And, I come from a research environment, so, I know the value of research. So we need to somehow nurture research, development and innovation, and leverage that energy of Africa's youth, the can-do attitude that they have. So, my suggestion is, African-focused research agendas at higher education institutions. And, how about funding and supporting startups and entrepreneurs, and not only looking externally. Let's believe in and nurture Africa's talent. A very interesting, I saw a report the other day, it's probably the same for other countries in Africa, but where they found this weird anomaly where many of our software developers are kind of looking internationally for jobs. And they're actually working remotely and kind of providing very good technical skills and development services to international companies. And at the same time, South African companies are actually looking externally for developers and for technical people, instead of using the people that are right there around the corner. So, we really need to change that kind of attitude and realize what good raw talent we have here in Africa. I've got some very specific recommended actions. which I'm not going to go into too much detail. I basically just want to say that, these are kind of based on what the EU has been doing. And I wanted to talk just very quickly about this whole concept of agile governance. And agile governance was coined and was kind of, there was a white paper written by the World Economic Forum. And, it just makes sense. I mean, it looks at active collaboration between government, civil society, academia, and the private sector to co-create the future in terms of policy and regulation in a fast-developing world. It uses some of the concepts of design science, design thinking, to kind of, take an agile approach to doing new things. It looks at using incubators. It looks at using sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes, policy incubators, et cetera. And, to some extent, I think that we have a good example in South Africa. I think that when the South African Reserve Bank drove the whole intergovernmental Fintech working group, they were actually doing exactly what the Agile Governance white paper was suggesting. So I think we can learn so much from them, and it can be applied in other areas and in other countries as well. So in a nutshell, I think to move blockchain forward in Africa, I believe we should leverage the energy and the creativity of our youth and the entrepreneurs. We need to be flexible, but still deliberate while we go about changing the status quo. And I believe that together we can create Africa 4.0. Thanks very much.
Meryll, thank you so much. Thank you so much joining us from South Africa. It's really great to get this overview from your side, because like in the Netherlands, we're usually a little bit in this filter bubble, seeing the implementations and the blockchain solutions in the Netherlands, in Europe, maybe some unicorns globally. But I was just sitting here silent and listening to all these great examples of not just ideas, but projects that have already been launched successfully. Thank you so much taking us on a journey throughout Africa and showing us all the incremental examples how blockchain can actually have and has already a social impact. I'm very, very curious to learn. We're almost at the end of 2020, a very, very, strange year, of course, for most of us. We've seen a lot of great examples of projects that have been launched in the last year in the African continent. What is the most exciting project, the most exciting blockchain projects that will launch in the upcoming year, according to you?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So there's one project that will probably become a POC in May next year, and that's looking at the whole issue of provenance in food supply chains, and looking at food safety in particular, because we believe that, there's a kind of going to be a post-COVID world eventually. And so the South African government, for example, at the moment is looking at not only building back, but this whole focus on building back better. And food safety, food security has been a major worry throughout all the COVID lockdowns that we've had in South Africa. So to me, that's going to be extremely exciting. The idea is to link emerging farmers, small farmers, rural farmers, in a local way to consumers close to them. So it's a project that Sanba is busy supporting, and we co-funding. So, that's something that I'm becoming quite excited about.
Wonderful. So you're speaking, of course, of Sanba, the organization that you're currently also leading. You've seen multiple great collaborations happening in Africa in the past years. I'm curious to learn, what is the key lesson of all these collaborations, what really did not work out? So what is the thing where it maybe clashed between collaborative partners?
Okay. I think, I spoke about the KYC example between the banks, and that seemed to be going so well. We had about 5 banks involved. And I think that with a lot of these projects, it kind of starts with technology enthusiasts, the techies kind of in the back office, who start fiddling with blockchain, realize the potential. So I think that, so that becomes problematic to actually get the business owners and the business decision makers involved. So while that particular project was kind of just the techies kind of talking to each other across these banking barriers, it went very well. Unfortunately, then we started to see some competitive behavior between the banks, and one or two of the banks actually broke away and did their own solution, which doesn't help anyone at all, because digital identity, credentialing, etc. They're still working on interoperability guidelines. So that was quite a big disappointment to me, and also the fact that they really struggled to get buy-in from the Department of Home Affairs, who is actually responsible for identity in the country, civic identity matters. So I'm hoping that the great success, well, we had 2 pilots then, each one using different technologies, but they were both very successful. So, it's one of the reasons why we're wanting to start this digital identity innovation center, or center of excellence. We're still kind of throwing the ideas around. So we need to be really careful of competitive behavior at this stage of the blockchain environment in Africa, because we can still all learn and grow in a non-competitive way.
Well, beautifully said. And little competition, couple disappointments, but I think you can be very proud of all the amazing developments in the blockchain sphere in Africa. Meryll Ford, thank you so much again for joining us live from South Africa. It was a great pleasure having you with us on the virtual stage. I'm astonished by all the amazing examples that you shared with us today. Thank you so much. Stay safe. And also for you, we hope to welcome you again at our Dutch Blockchain Week, hopefully next time in a physical form.
Be wonderful. Thank you so much. Right. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you,
so much.
Jan.